In the stillness of night, a pastor slipped away from the pulpit and into the arms of a woman old enough to be his mother. What was supposed to be a night of forbidden pleasure quickly turned into a nightmare that would shock his congregation, shame his family, and leave his very manhood rotting before sunrise. Tonight we uncover the chilling story of a man of God whose secret sins caught up with him in the most horrifying way. Welcome to Dark Motives, the channel where we take you deep inside the most disturbing true crime stories. If you are new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss when we uncover the darkest corners of human behavior. And before we dive further into this chilling story, I want you to scroll down to the comments and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Your support helps this community grow, and your comments make each episode more powerful. Now let us go back to the beginning, to the pastor who believed his secret desires would stay hidden forever. In the heart of Jacksonville, Florida, Pastor Raymond was known as a man of faith and authority. For years he stood at the pulpit every Sunday, delivering sermons that touched on morality, discipline, and the dangers of temptation. To his congregation, he was more than just a preacher. He was a father figure, a trusted guide who always seemed to have the right words at the right time. But behind the polished shoes and the carefully chosen scriptures, there were whispers. Some said Pastor Raymond enjoyed too much attention from women in the church. Others noticed how he lingered after service, smiling a little too warmly at certain members. Still, no one dared to confront him. His reputation was untouchable, and his influence stretched far beyond the church walls. To the outside world, he was a man of God walking in righteousness. But in private, he battled desires that clashed with the very sermons he preached, desires that would eventually drag him into a scandal so dark, even the city of Jacksonville would be left in shock. Her name was Evelyn, a 71-year-old woman who had lived most of her life quietly on the outskirts of Jacksonville. To her neighbors, she was a widow with a gentle smile, someone who kept to herself and never caused trouble. But behind closed doors, Evelyn carried a loneliness that had been eating at her for years. She had lost her husband more than a decade earlier, and though she tried to fill the silence with gardening, church meetings, and visits from her grandchildren, the nights were still unbearably long. Age had not erased her desires. It had only made them more complicated, more hidden, and far more desperate. When she met Pastor Raymond, something inside her shifted. Here was a man who spoke with authority, who laid hands on the sick, who preached about heaven and hell. Yet when he looked at her, she swore she saw more than just a pastor's compassion. She saw hunger. She saw a secret flame that matched her own. The two of them began speaking after church, conversations that seemed harmless at first. A compliment here, a soft laugh there, and soon Evelyn was dressing differently. She wore brighter colors, added touches of perfume, and stayed behind after service, waiting for the moment when his eyes would meet hers. What began as a quiet exchange of looks and whispers quickly grew into something more dangerous. Evelyn knew she was risking her reputation as a grandmother and a respected elder in the church. But the thrill of attention, the rush of being desired again, was more powerful than her fear. And that is what pulled her closer to the man who would one day ruin her name and destroy his own life in the process. It was late on a humid summer evening in Jacksonville when Pastor Raymond finally crossed the line. Evelyn had invited him over under the pretense of prayer and counsel, a meeting that could have been explained away if anyone asked. But both of them knew what was about to happen. The curtains were drawn, the doors locked, and the silence inside her small home carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. As the night deepened, whispers turned into touches, and touches turned into what they both had secretly craved. For hours the pastor gave in to the very temptation he had warned his congregation about. Every word he had preached about resisting sin seemed to fade into the shadows as his desire consumed him. Evelyn, though years older, responded with a hunger that startled even him. But what neither of them knew was that this night would not end the way they expected. Somewhere between the passion and the secrecy, something went terribly wrong. The pastor felt a burning sensation he could not explain, but he ignored it, thinking it was nothing more than exhaustion. Evelyn noticed the sweat on his face, the strain in his voice, but she said nothing. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, Pastor Raymond was not the same man who had stepped into her home hours earlier. The act that was supposed to stay hidden between them had planted the seed of a nightmare that neither prayer nor silence could erase. And within hours, the pastor would realize that his secret night of desire had carried a price far greater than he ever imagined. When the first rays of sunlight broke over Jacksonville, Pastor Raymond stirred in Evelyn's bed, expecting the usual guilt that followed a night of sin. But what greeted him was something far more terrifying. A sharp, searing pain shot through his lower body, unlike anything he had ever felt before. At first he tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was only fatigue, a consequence of a restless night. But within minutes, the pain grew unbearable. He pulled away the sheets and froze. His manhood, once the source of his secret pride and hidden shame, was swollen, darkening in color and burning with an intensity that left him trembling. Panic set in. He rushed to the bathroom mirror, his breath heavy, his hands shaking, and what he saw staring back at him was the beginning of a nightmare. Flesh that should have been healthy was turning pale and sickly, patches of rot forming where there should have been life. Sweat poured down his face as his knees buckled beneath him. Evelyn, still half asleep, heard the thud of his body hitting the bathroom tiles. She rushed in, her eyes widening at the sight of the man she had given herself to, writhing in agony. Fear choked her voice. This was no ordinary sickness. This looked like punishment, something that no doctor could easily explain. The smell was faint at first, but it grew stronger by the minute, a sickening odor that clung to the walls of the small house. Evelyn covered her mouth, her heart pounding in her chest. She had wanted affection, companionship, the thrill of being wanted again. Instead, she now stood in front of a man who seemed to be rotting alive before her very eyes. Raymond tried to pray, his lips trembling with words of repentance, but his voice was drowned out by cries of pain. He could feel his body betraying him, his secret sin poisoning him from the inside out. Morning had arrived, and with it came the horrifying realization that his night of forbidden desire might cost him far more than his reputation. It might cost him his very life. By the end of that same day, the whispers had already begun. In Jacksonville, news traveled fast, and when it involved a man like Pastor Raymond, it spread like wildfire. Some said he had fallen ill suddenly. Others claimed they had seen him rush to a clinic with his head down in shame. The details were murky, but one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong with the man who once stood at the pulpit and preached purity. Members of his congregation gathered in small groups, their voices low but urgent. Mothers who had once brought their children to him for blessings now whispered warnings to keep their daughters at a distance. Men shook their heads in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the holy figure they admired with the scandalous rumors filling the air. By the second day, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Some said it was a disease, others swore it was a curse sent from God himself. Evelyn's name began to surface in hushed conversations. People wondered why she had suddenly stopped attending the market, why her curtains stayed closed, and why her face seemed absent from the places she once frequented. The church board was in turmoil. Should they stand by their pastor, or distance themselves before the scandal consumed them all? The elders argued behind closed doors, while outside, the members demanded answers. Faith was cracking, loyalty was fading, and the community that once looked to Raymond for strength was now drowning in suspicion. And as the whispers grew into open discussions, one chilling question lingered in the air. Was this simply a man's secret life catching up with him? Or was something far darker at work, something that could not be explained by medicine or human reasoning alone? When Pastor Raymond finally agreed to seek medical help, he was rushed to a hospital in Jacksonville under heavy secrecy. The doctors who examined him were stunned by what they found. His body was deteriorating at an alarming rate, the infection spreading faster than anything they had ever seen. They ran tests for every known disease, every infection, every possible cause. Yet the results gave no clear answers. The medical staff worked frantically, prescribing antibiotics, cleaning the wounds, and attempting treatments meant for the most severe cases of infection. But nothing seemed to stop the decay. It was as if his flesh was rejecting life itself, breaking down cell by cell, hour by hour. Nurses whispered in the hallways, trading glances of fear each time they left his room. They had seen infections before, but never something this aggressive, never something this unexplainable. Meanwhile, Evelyn kept her distance. She knew the spotlight was creeping closer to her name, and the thought of being exposed as the woman behind the scandal filled her with dread. Some believed she had passed something to him, a hidden sickness she carried without knowing. Others whispered of witchcraft, of curses, of spirits that punished sins committed in the dark. Doctors dismissed the talk of curses, yet they could not hide their confusion. Every test they ran came back inconclusive. The infection spread in ways that defied logic, destroying tissue at a rate faster than their charts could explain. One physician even remarked quietly that it seemed less like an illness, and more like a force eating him alive from within. Raymond himself grew weaker with each passing day. His voice cracked as he asked for forgiveness, his eyes darting between prayer and despair. The medical world had no answers, and the silence of heaven only made his suffering feel more like a sentence than an accident. For the first time in his life, the man who once preached certainty was drowning in questions no one could answer. As Pastor Raymond's condition worsened, the story could no longer be contained within the walls of the hospital. Authorities in Jacksonville stepped in, demanding answers. The police questioned Evelyn, pressing her on what had happened that night, but she refused to speak in detail. All she would admit was that the pastor had come willingly, and that what followed was between two consenting adults. Behind the scenes, investigators began piecing together fragments of the story. Some believed it was a straightforward case of a hidden infection, possibly an illness passed during their secret night. But others within the department whispered that this was no ordinary disease. The speed of the decay, the mystery surrounding its origin, and the strange silence of the woman involved left them unsettled. In the church, theories took on an even darker tone. Elders claimed that God had revealed the pastor's sins in the most humiliating way possible. Members argued that his punishment was divine justice, a warning to all who pretended to be holy while living a double life. Others, more fearful, whispered about curses, pointing to Evelyn's age and her sudden influence over a man of God as evidence that she was no ordinary woman. Some even suggested that Evelyn herself had orchestrated the downfall, using charms or hidden powers that no medicine could fight against. The rumors painted her as everything from a desperate widow to a witch who had ensnared a pastor in her trap. The investigations brought no clear answers, and the divide between science and faith grew wider with every passing day. Was this man simply another victim of a cruel infection, or had his sins dragged him into a judgment that no human hand could save him from? The question hung in the air, heavy and unshakable, as both the police and the community waited to see what would happen next. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within days, the news of Pastor Raymond's condition spread beyond Jacksonville, reaching neighboring towns and even the media. Headlines painted him as a fallen man of God, a preacher who had traded holiness for hidden desires. Congregation members who once defended him now avoided his name altogether, fearful that association would stain their own reputations. At the hospital, doctors reached a grim conclusion. The damage was irreversible. To save his life, drastic measures had to be taken. Whispers spread that surgeons had no choice but to remove what was left of his manhood, leaving him broken, humiliated, and forever marked by his actions. For Raymond, it was worse than death. His secret sin had not only been exposed, it had stripped him of the very identity he had used to hide his double life. Evelyn, meanwhile, became a prisoner in her own home. Neighbors avoided her, children whispered insults when they passed her gate, and even family members stopped visiting. Some said she had cursed the pastor, others claimed she had simply been the instrument of his downfall. Either way, her name became tied to shame, her reputation destroyed by a night she could never undo. The church itself crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Attendance dropped, donations dried up, and trust in its leadership vanished. The elders tried to salvage what remained, but the shadow of the story was too heavy to lift. For many, it was proof that their faith in men could not compare to their faith in God alone. The pulpit where Raymond once thundered with authority now stood empty, a silent reminder of hypocrisy and betrayal. And as the weeks turned into months, the memory of Pastor Raymond's downfall remained etched into the community. Parents used it as a warning to their children. Believers cited it as a sign of divine judgment, and skeptics pointed to it as another example of human weakness hiding behind a mask of holiness. His name, once spoken with respect, was now remembered only as a cautionary tale of desire, deception, and destruction. In the end, Pastor Raymond's story became more than just a scandal in Jacksonville. It became a lesson whispered in homes, retold in churches, and remembered in hushed conversations. A man who once stood as a beacon of faith was brought down not by enemies, but by his own hidden desires. What began as a secret night of passion ended in humiliation, pain, and a legacy no one would envy. For Evelyn, life would never return to normal. Her face carried the weight of shame wherever she went, and her silence only fueled the rumors that haunted her name. Whether she was guilty of something more than passion, or whether she was simply caught in the crossfire of a man's downfall, the truth was buried beneath fear and speculation. The doctors never gave a clear explanation, and the community never agreed on what really happened. Some called it divine judgment, others called it disease, and a few insisted it was something beyond human understanding. The mystery still lingers, a chilling reminder of how quickly a secret can destroy everything built in the light. So what do you think? Was this the hand of fate, a medical tragedy, or a punishment no science could explain? I want you to scroll down and leave your thoughts in the comments. Share your perspective, because stories like this are not just about the people involved. They are about the questions they leave behind. And if you found this story gripping, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. On Dark Motives, we bring you chilling true crime stories every day, stories that expose the darkest corners of human behavior. Thank you for watching until the end, and I will see you in the next story.